Okay, so today we're gonna go through Monopoly, not the game itself, but the market structure. And so, in terms of the definition, a monopoly is defined as a market structure in which only one firm exists and supplies the market. And so, likewise, this is one of the characteristics of monopoly, but other characteristics will include high barriers of entry. And so, barriers of entry refers to the obstacles that prevent a firm from joining a market and beginning production. And so we can see why a monopoly would have high barriers to entry so that it can be the only firm operating in the market. And so for the characteristics of barriers of entry, we can classify them through the acronym of BLADE. And so starting off with B for branding, um, a monopolist must create a unique image or name of their product. And so like examples of this may include Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and others because if new firms of soft drinks were to produce products, it could be unrecognizable to the market, which would make it difficult for them to enter. And then we have L for legal barriers, which includes patents and licenses. And so these are like granted by the government. And like although these barriers may not lead to monopoly, it restricts competition and thus it contributes to monopoly power. And so we have for A, aggressive tactics. This is where a monopolist employs a bunch of measures to restrict competition as like new firm enters the market. So, for example, let's say a new pizza firm enters the market, um, and as a result, dominating firms like Pizza Hut may decide to lower their prices and invest heavily in advertising. This would reduce competition, which will also coerce the new firm to shut down. And as a result, these aggressive tactics act as a barrier to entry. In terms of D, it is called the domination of resources. And so basically, if a firm has ownership of an essential resource, it makes it difficult for other firms and potential new firms to get hold of it. Again, this discourages them from joining. Finally, monopolists will experience great levels of economies of scale. In this case, E. Economies of scale refers to the decreasing average costs of production in the long run as a result of a firm increasing all its inputs. And this means that economies of scale can act as a barrier to entry because as monopolists are able to lower their costs of production, they can sell their goods and services at a lower price. And consequently, by selling at lower prices, new firms may potentially be unable to compete with the monopolist because of these lower prices sold by the monopolists. Since they are so low compared to the average costs of production of this new existing firm, they can't compete with this price, and as a result, they need to shut down. In terms of other characteristics of a monopoly, as mentioned, there's only one seller in the market, and because of this, there are no substitutes for the products sold by the monopolists from other firms, because if there were substitutes, then consumers can switch to buy other goods from this other firm, and therefore there wouldn't be a monopoly in the first place. Okay, so moving on to the diagrams for a monopoly, we need to know how a firm would profit maximize in the market structure of a monopoly. And so for a firm to profit maximize, they must sell at a price and at a quantity where marginal costs equals to marginal revenue. And thus MC equals MR. This is a very important concept because it applies to all the other market structures, for example, perfect competition, oligopoly, monopolistic competition, and so on. Again, profit maximization occurs when a firm sells at a price where MC equals MR. And so looking at this diagram for monopoly, let's say the diagram shows the firm of a monopoly called Air Namibia. Uh, just to give you guys the context, right? Air Namibia is the only airline in Namibia that offers domestic flights, and so hence it is a monopoly. And in the recent years, they have been accused for charging unreasonable prices, but also providing poor customer service. And these are disadvantages of monopoly, which I'll go briefly. Because since Air Namibia is the only firm supplying the market for plane tickets, they can charge at a price whatever they want, but also they can provide the goods with poor quality because there's no competition by other firms. But anyways, linking this to the diagram, if Air Namibia makes an economic profit, so basically where price is greater than average total costs, price as in the price sold of their goods and services, right? This would be what the diagram would look like. And so here, we can see that Air Namibia is operating at the profit maximizing level where MC equals MR. And this is where the blue dot is located. And it can be seen that the average total costs of Air Namibia at the profit maximizing level of output would be at P. However, because it sells its goods and services, like in this case their plane tickets, at the price P1, it is greater than the price P. This means that the revenue gained from each unit of the plane tickets is greater than the average total costs of each unit of the plane ticket. And so as a result, it can receive and gain profit, which is equal to the green shaded box. Just to reiterate, this diagram shows the economic profit, the diagram for the economic profit for Air Namibia. In terms of normal profit, this is where an Air Namibia earns an economic profit of 0. But either way, just to mention briefly, having an economic profit of 0 means that Air Namibia can still operate in the long run. And this is because they are still covering all their average total costs. And this can be seen in the diagram. And for a monopolistic firm operating in normal profit, its average total costs curve will be a tangent to the demand curve. Again, using the profit maximizing approach, MC equals MR, it could be seen that the firm will sell at a price P1 and at the quantity Q. But because average total costs is equal to the price in which the firm is selling at, it means that the total revenue is equal to average costs. And as a result, this firm will earn 0 profit because total revenue subtracted by total cost will give 0 since both equals to each other. Lastly, in terms of loss minimization, should Air Namibia be at a point in which its average total costs are greater than the price at which it is selling its plane tickets, the average total cost curve will be higher than the demand curve, which is equal to the average revenue. So this is the diagram for an economic loss or subnormal profit for a monopoly. Again, under the assumption that a monopolist operates at the profit maximizing point MC equals MR, it will operate at a price P1 and sell at the quantity of Q. However, this time, it can be seen that average total costs at the profit maximizing level of output is equal to P. Thus, because average total costs is greater than the price at which the monopolist sells its good, means that the firm will earn subnormal profit, and consequently, it earns subnormal profit equal to the red shaded area. Okay, so these diagrams I've explained just now were all diagrams for a monopoly, and the prices at which it should operate to profit maximize. And however, as there are other goals of a firm, firms may decide to maximize their revenue instead of profit. And instead, this is given by the rule MR equals 0. And thus, by selling at a quantity where marginal revenue is equal to 0, the firm will operate at a point in which it maximizes total revenue. And why is this? This arises because marginal revenue is the derivative of total revenue. We've covered this in the last previous videos, and thus this means that as marginal revenue equals to 0, total revenue will be at a maxima, and this is shown in this diagram. and as a result, a firm can maximize their revenue. Um, Referring back to the Air Namibia example, if it were to maximize their revenue, then it would sell at a price P because of MR equals zero. Um, Nonetheless, there is a slight difference between profit maximization and revenue maximization. Um, and so, if Air Namibia were to profit maximize, they would sell at a higher price whilst producing at a lower quantity compared to the revenue maximizer, which would sell at lower prices but at greater quantities.
Okay, so what Yanis has been talking about is the idea of a monopoly, and what I will be talking about the idea of a natural monopoly. Now, a natural monopoly. It has this is the key word right here, natural. And I think when we talk about natural monopolies, it's best to consider some real life examples. I think the best one is actually I think the best one would especially considering how local it is. It would be Hong Kong's MTR. And you know I bring this up because it contrasts lots of other the metro systems of other countries very well. So when we have let's think about the features of the MTR. First of all, it's the single it's the single metro provider, isn't it? And it's the single metro provider because it can provide for the entire market. Consider another city, Tokyo. In Tokyo, there are multiple metro companies, and when you switch lines, sometimes you have to switch to another metro company to get on the train for another one. In that situation, the metro market, the metro rail market in Tokyo cannot be provided by one company, but in Hong Kong, the government really has installed a single metro provider because it is a natural monopoly. I'm just going to highlight that. It's a natural monopoly. So, what does it really mean, a natural monopoly? Well, a natural monopoly is a monopoly that can provide for the entire market. Provide for the entire market for the entire market and with lower costs compared with essentially compared with more companies. So we can say lower cost compared with two or more firms in the market. And you know, the MTR is a good example because when we compare Hong Kong metro prices, they're much cheaper with those of of Japan, of Tokyo, for example. When in Tokyo, you have to when you switch lines and you switch to another metro provider, you have to pay another fee to go on the other line. Hong Kong, you can just pay, with the octopus, go from Tung Chung to, Mong Kok to Central to Kwun. It's all under one single metro provider because it has lower costs and it can provide for the entire market, as we see. So that's the definition for a natural monopoly. Essentially, it's natural because it can provide for the entire market and it is lower costs than compared to two or more firms in the market. All right, and that's a key point, really. An entire market and lower costs. Now let's go on to explain why a natural monopoly can sustain their output. The main reason for natural monopolies' existence is economies of scale. And I feel like this should be pretty obvious to you all. When the natural monopolist is providing for, first of all, let me just change to another color because this is a bit too dark. When the natural monopolist is providing for the entire market, uh, the cost of production falls. All right, so so costs fall for entire market. That's because the natural monopolist is able to provide for the entire first of all, let me just highlight this keyword. The costs are falling for the entire market. Yes, and that's important because the costs fall for the entire market because the natural monopolist can continue to exploit economies of scale. And that's why, by the way, that is why the natural monopolist exists, because the natural monopolist can continue exploiting economies of scale without encountering diseconomies of scale. The best way, I feel like the best way to illustrate this concept is with the graph. So I'm gonna just use white. Is with the economies of scale graph, which Yan has probably shown you very well, but I will show you one more time. So here we have quantity and cost, which, as you recall, is also representative of prices. So for the entire market, what the entire market will be represented with is with, let's just say, this demand curve right here, not the straightest demand curve, guys. Not the straightest demand curve, but I think it'll do. So let's do demand of the market. Okay, and the natural monopolist will exist if the supply, if the long run average total costs are like that. And they look like this. First of all, let's have a minimum efficiency just so it's a correct diagram. But the long run average total cost curve for the natural monopolist looks like this because the natural monopolist is able to continue exploiting economies of scale. As you recall, economies of scale, the economies of scale diagram essentially looks like this because we have the minimum efficiency, right? And this part right here, let me try to change to another color so it's less confusing. This downward sloping part is economies of scale. This upward sloping part, diseconomies of scale, right? What the natural monopolist is able to do is to take advantage of this section, right? Is take advantage of this section and apply it to the entire, and apply it to the demand of the entire market. And that is why the natural monopolist is naturally suited to supply for the entire market because the market demand is within the range of economies of scale. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the natural monopolist has lower costs than two or more smaller firms in the market, because the natural monopolist has a long run average total cost curve, or is encountering long run average total costs that are falling as quantity demanded increases, because the market quantity demand is within the range of the falling average costs, or within the range of economies of scale. And that is how the natural monopolist is able to have lower costs. And that if we go back to our example of the MTR, that is why the MTR, guys, is able to, that's why the MTR is able to, sorry, the wrong color there, able to have fees, cheaper prices for us relative to other countries. I'm sure you hear Hong Kong media constantly uh, complaining about the high MTR prices, but in reality, relative to other countries, Hong Kong's metro prices pretty low uh, because of natural monopolies of scale. If let's consider this, if there were two Hong Kong metro providers, which there were for a while, but let's consider if there were two or more, you would have to go, okay, we'll go Kwun Tong line, and I want to switch to, I want to go to Sha Tin. Okay, well, I have to leave. I have to pay like $3 here. I have to leave and go pay another like $6 here, and then and since they're competing firms, they might be two sets of rail going to Sha Tin, which is a waste of resources, and once you're done in Sha Tin, you might. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that you have to pay more when you have more firms in the market. That illustrates a situation that can be bettered for society with a natural monopoly. That's why with the MTR it's cheaper, and that is essentially the essence of a natural monopoly. It is able to produce at a lower cost for the entire market, and that is beneficial to society. And I think that's a really important point. Natural monopolies, let's change to another color. I'll do green. Natural monopolies are beneficial to society because of cheaper or because of lower costs, right? And because not just lower costs, but it's lower costs for the entire market, and hence, hence two or more firms would be higher cost. Two or more firms would simply use more resources and would not be beneficial to the economy and to society because consumers would be facing higher costs. And so when you see natural monopolies like that of the MTR, it is usually beneficial. Of course, when we're evaluating this, we can say, okay, well, monopolies have no competition, there will be no incentive to innovate. Those are all very good evaluative points. But in general, if you spot a natural monopoly, it is likely there for a reason, and the reasons are, as we've seen, lower costs, which is better use of resources, better resource allocation. It's better resource allocation, and entire market sees cheaper prices. So really, this is social benefit, or increased welfare, and that's why natural monopolies exist. So I hope you found this video helpful. Remember this diagram. This is the primary explanatory diagram, and thank you for listening.